pick up the next time with, again, we'll emphasize the fact that you look at this as the patriarchal period of time that we're studying about, and this line extended on across will go through the Mosaical age, which lasts about 1,500 to 1,600 years, and then the Christian age in which we now live. This patriarchal age is about 2,500 years. God spoke to the heads of households, to the patriarch. And here we have a written law given to Moses on Mount Sinai. Here we have a written law given through Christ. After Abraham, then there was Isaac and Jacob. Right there is where we were. He had 12 sons. And we were talking about that next to the last son that's mentioned, Joseph. Joseph had a whole brother. His name was Benjamin. Benjamin was the youngest. Now, I would like to whet your appetite for always studying the Bible, but I'd like to tell you that if you like to read a good novel, then you will not find a better story than reading about Joseph. I'll guarantee you, if you've got the time and you don't have to go somewhere or got to do something on schedule, you pick up the Bible from the time that Joseph enters the picture, you will not stop. It's just like reading a good novel until you get to the end of those things, or to the end of Genesis, really. And that starts over about 31st chapter of Genesis, 34, 32, 34, 35, somewhere along in there. And why? Because of the way it turns out. As we know, you notice we talked about Joseph being the dreamer. So this is an important character here. At one time, when all things were, this story becomes completely climaxed, I guess you'd say. They're all over in Egypt. Joseph told his brothers that, what? You meant evil, but God had a hand in this, in the way we'd say it today. He sent me ahead, or he had things arranged. The way we might say it today was through providential care. These things happen, and now I'm here to help you. Now, slavery was not uncommon in those days. People could be sold into slavery. And because of these dreams that Joseph had, his brothers were angry at him because the dreams showed that they would one day bow down to him. And you can just imagine the oldest brother in a family telling any of the younger brothers, buddy, one of these days you're going to bow down to me. And they didn't like that at all. And they didn't like the fact that he was petted anyway, because his daddy had shown him more preference. And of course, it's not hard to see through the Bible that he loved the mother more, and therefore he loved that son more than he did the others. Or if he, let's say he petted him all more than he did the others. He made him the coat of many colors. And we were talking about the fact that he had gone to see about his brothers. Could possibly be as far as 50 miles away, where the herds. They saw him coming and said, let's just kill him and get rid of him. And the older brother, Reuben, said, no, don't do that. We can get rid of him, though. We'll put him down in this pit, hole in the ground. And then when some traders came along, they were descendants, as my understanding of it is that they were descendants of Ishmael. Now, you know that I told you about the split between Abraham's two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. And the descendants of Ishmael, then later became Arabs and so on, and we got all this enmity down through the hundreds, even thousands of years between Arabs and Jews over there. And now between Arabs and the rest of the world, that Farrakhan is a good example of it. They hate all sorts of people who don't go along with the Mohammedan type religion or branches thereof. That's what Farrakhan is. They recognize the Koran as their guide. But they sold him to this group of traders that were going down into Egypt. And assuming they were up in here, and here comes a group of traders going down into Egypt. They killed a goat and put the blood of that goat on the coat of many colors, took it back and told Jacob, your son's been killed. Here's his coat, and so on. And he went in the mourning and was forever in mourning until he found out later that Joseph did indeed live. But when he was sent down here, they, the traders, sold him into the household of, remember this name, Potiphar, P-O-T-I-P-H-A-R, Potiphar, I guess it is. This Potiphar was the captain of the guard for the Pharaoh, or the king in Egypt. And they sold him as a slave or a servant. And it's figured he was, let's see, about 17 years old. And he was a fine young man. He did those things which were right. He, all assignments that were given him, he performed real well. And his master, Potiphar, gave him complete charge of his household. But he could not control his wife. Potiphar couldn't. And Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him. And he told her, well, the master gave him, let's say, run of the mill, the run of the whole household and all that. But he was not going to get involved with her. But she at one time tried to pull him physically into a relationship, got his cloak or coat or whatever it was, a robe of some sort, I guess, and he ran. And that angered her, so she told her husband when he showed up that Joseph had tried to seduce her. In other words, that's the way we'd put it today. Well, that made him angry. And what happened then? Put him in prison. That's right. Put him in prison. They had all sorts of power in those days. They didn't sit down and have a long trial like O.J. trial. They just put him in prison right quick. Well, in prison, he was a model prisoner, evidently. Everywhere he went. Now, this is lessons within themselves. Under any conditions, a Christian always should, nowadays, let his Christianity show through. It doesn't matter what kind of conditions you're under. We had a preacher here one time years ago when communism was rampant in the world, and he said, I might surprise you, but if you were in Russia, you should show yourself as a Christian and be as obedient to the laws as you can, except where they might conflict with the laws of Christ. Well, that's right. That's what Joseph was doing here. He was being a good citizen and a good servant where whatever condition he found himself in. And so he was respected in prison too. Now, along about that time, by the way, this deal with Potiphar's wife, we oftentimes hear men, particularly young men, saying, I don't know whether I could withstand some of the temptations that beset me. Could you imagine any greater temptation for a young man, probably 17, 18, somewhere along in there, than a woman? She was probably beautiful, we don't know for certain, but a woman that just was going to physically force herself on the man. You usually think of that the other way around. In fact, the laws here always protect the woman from rape. But that's what this would have been. It would have been rape from the other, looking at it from the other way. Courts of our land nowadays would look at it that way if they knew all the facts. But God will provide us a way if we intend to do that which is right. So this is not exactly like Abrahamic faith, but it tends towards that direction. He headed out of there. He ran. There's always a way to get away from it. You can run.
The New Testament says flee fornication.
That's right.
Flee is a word that requires quick action.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, evade or try to, go around. It's flee. That's what he did.
That's right. So there's a great lesson even there. All right. In prison now, the Pharaoh, or the king of the land, he had some dreams. And, let's go with some more dreams before that. There was two servants of the king in prison. Who were they that had these dreams first? The baker and the butler. The baker and the butler. Special servant, the butler would have been. And they had dreams, and this man Joseph interpreted them for him. Now the cook or the baker, what was to happen to him? That's right, he was going to be killed. You'd have to read the details of the, unless somebody's got them right on the tip of their tongue right now. That meant his flesh would be eaten by birds, and so his bread would be, and so on. But this came to pass that he was killed, and then the birds would eat his flesh. And the baker or the butler, his dream would show that he would be freed, and he would be restored to his position and would again serve the king. And because they came true, Joseph told the butler, said, "Remember me when you get out, because I'm in here without cause." And of course that fellow forgot him. About 2 years, wasn't it? I believe it was, before he remembered him. So there's lessons there, of course. But then later on, when the Pharaoh, the king of this country of Egypt, had his dreams, they're the ones that's remembered the most, I guess. By the way, did you look up those two dreams that the butler and the baker? Tell us the details of the butler and the baker by the Bible there.
You want me to just read it?
Read it.
And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and the blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand.
these things, one of them meant you're going to die, you're going to be killed, and the other meant you will be freed. All right. What chapter is that in? 40. So as you're reading along on the story of Joseph, this is all part of it. Remember, you're following his life like a novel from the time he is born all the way through. The Pharaoh had two dreams. One of them had to do with kine. What is kine? Cattle. K-I-N-E, kine, cattle. It's a good test question, you know. Kine, cattle. And he dreamed that he saw coming out of the Nile 7 fat kine, followed by 7 lean kine or cows, and the 7 lean cows ate up or destroyed the 7 fat cows. And what now?
They didn't get any fatter.
That's right, and they didn't get any fatter. And what about the grains, or stalks, you might say, ears of corn, if you want to compare it to it? What about the grain? Wasn't it the same way? 7 plenty and 7 nothing, or 7 bad grains or stalks. And then the interpretation of that, of course, the Pharaoh was perplexed by it, and he called in wise men and he said, "Tell me the meaning of my dreams." And they couldn't. Until this butler that should have remembered Joseph earlier said, "I know a man that can interpret dreams." 2 years later, I know a man that can interpret dreams. He's in prison. And the Pharaoh said, "Send him to me." And of course, he told Joseph the dreams, and Joseph told him the meaning thereof. And what was the meaning of the dreams?
7 good years and 7 years famine.
That's right. There would be 7 good years of harvest and so on. In other words, as we call it in this country, we're having a boom, and there's a depression follows. The things like that's been happening all down through the ages. There'll be 7 good years followed by 7 bad years when the crops will be bad and so on. And the 7 bad years, of course, would eat up all that the people had. Well, it was good that Joseph had interpreted that, and the Pharaoh says, "Because you have given me these answers, I'll give you some responsibilities. You are in charge of storing up grain and storing up reserves so that we'll be able to get through these bad years. In fact, I'll make you second in power to me," which meant a lot. Whatever he said went unless the Pharaoh vetoed it. Second in command to the Pharaoh. And Joseph then was in charge of having all people to store certain amounts of that which they made for the 7 years that were to follow after these 7 good years. By the way, archaeologists have found evidences of where some of these grain storage bins were in modern times that they assume were storage bins used by the Egyptians during those years of plenty. All right, but this famine hit this area up in here too. So after 7 years, these folks up in here didn't know anything about it, so they had not saved and prepared for this. It's kind of like folks who didn't prepare for the hurricane suffered the consequences over on the beach. But by the way, we got a letter in there from somebody giving $30 for some tapes of our lectureship and so on. Said maybe all those records have been destroyed for the hurricane. You read it and chuckle because nothing happened here, of course. But just in case it did, we'll use this for the defender and things like that. People listening to what happened here in Pensacola think Pensacola's probably gone off the map almost when it wasn't so. It was only over on the beach. All right. They were in the same condition up in here as they were down in here. Now, all during this time, this was a much traveled, let's say, I call it a road down through here. The reason I'm telling you this now is that later on, when we see the children of Israel going out of this land of bondage over here, we wonder, well, why didn't they take the road and go straight on through there? But they had problems. They wandered 40 years on down in here. But when the people over in here began to suffer, these 7 years when they didn't have anything and the crops wasn't good and so on, Jacob and the 11 brothers of Joseph were saying, what are we going to do? Well, we've heard that down here in the land of Egypt they got plenty of grain. All you got to do is go down there and buy it. Well, he said, Jacob said, well, I'll just have to send some of you down there to get some supplies for us. So they sent them down, Jacob sent his sons down here, but he didn't send one for certain. Which one? Benjamin. Look here, you're not going to take my youngest boy. It's the only one I got left from Rachel, and I've already had one boy killed, Rachel's other son. So you other sons go on down there and get that grain. Well, they got down there, and lo and behold, the man in charge was Joseph. This is the reason I tell you, it reads just like a novel throughout the last part of Genesis. Here he had had dreams as a boy, and they mistreated him. They would have killed him. They sold him into slavery. But now look what's happening. He could have had every one of them killed just by the snap of his finger. Get rid of those folks, chop their heads off. But he didn't. He was filled with compassion, of course, but he did play a few tricks on them. He gave them grain, and he didn't reveal himself to them. And found out about his brother, his whole brother, Benjamin. He asked about it. And then he sent them back. What kind of trick did he play on them? Anybody? All right. Kind of like some of the tricks he called that people say police play on folks by planting evidence. He planted evidence of stealing in the bag of some. And then they caught them. And they were to then bring, he told them the next time they'd have to bring their youngest brother, that Benjamin. So they took this grain back up to their homeland, and we'd call it the Holy Land in here. And when they ran out of supplies again, they had to send Benjamin. And Joseph again recognized them, and he had a special meal for them. He had ordered, and probably through underlings had all this set up. And he was not quite ready to reveal himself. But then when he did, again, like this novel situation, it's sort of dramatic. It's leading up to a certain point where he's going to reveal himself. And what is so good about the story is you just wonder about those folks that would have killed him. If I'd have been them, I'd have been ready to scoot out of there, run in every direction. All 11 of them, just about, or all 10 of the other ones other than Benjamin. And he did reveal himself, though, and he loved them because he was their brother, and they were afraid. The Bible says they were afraid he'd have them put to death. And he had the power to, and in a sense the right to, but he told them that God was behind all of this and had sent him there. So in effect, he was a savior of his people. When you look at types and antitypes, the Old Testament study, oftentimes there are many types, or rather, yes, types back there, types of Christ, or types of this thing and that thing that happened in the New Testament. This is one of the types. The antitype would be Christ. Because Christ later on saved or gave us a plan for the salvation of all mankind. He, of course, his particular job was not all mankind, but he did save that nation of people, the Jews. Joseph did, because he was in position, in power down there. All right, when he revealed himself, and then they went back and told Jacob that his son was living. And I don't know how they got out of all that explanation either. You figure if Hollywood had a hold of that, they could really mess it up, or really fill in a lot of dramatic points there that's left out. At any rate, Joseph had told them to come down there and stay where he was. I've got the power and I've got the supplies. So Jacob and his whole family went down into the land of Goshen. That's something you must remember. The land of Goshen, which was a rich land area so far as fertility, near the Nile River Delta and so on. And there, Joseph, because of his special position with the Pharaoh and power, had all of his family down there to live and prosper. Now, Jacob took down with him, the Bible in a couple of different places gives a couple of figures. It may be according to what they're counting, or whether they're counting Joseph's family or not. But one place I believe it's 70, and another place 75 souls went down into this area. It's kind of like looking back at the flood. How many souls were saved in the flood? There was 8. Then you look at this, and so it's why you're playing on numbers. Well, these souls went down into this area, or these people did, 70 or 75 of them, and probably it's guessed that between 2 and 3 million came out 400 years later. Or there's some differences in the way that time's looked at too. But we just take that figure of 400 and go with it right now. So they went down into this area and lived and prospered. They became so prosperous, and so their work was rewarded so greatly that they multiplied rapidly. And the original Pharaoh, of course, died that had allowed them to come in. Time passed, and Joseph had died. And his influence, oftentimes you wonder, well, how much influence will I have in my life? And who will remember me 100 years from now? You look at Joseph. Those local people, once they forgot, that was it. Some people have said that, look at your life and you think, who will remember me 100 years from now? Well, stick your finger in a tub of water that's just as smooth and tranquil as you could imagine. And then pull it out. When you pull it out, you'll see a bunch of waves. But in about 4 or 5 seconds, they're gone. That's about how much influence we'll have on this earth sometimes. We think, well, what's it all for? But still, they went down into this area now, and they had multiplied to the point that they were a great nation of people. And the Pharaoh and the Egyptian influences there, those who influenced national policy, let's say, said, look at here. These people who are the descendants of Jacob are over here in Goshen, and there's so many of them that if our enemies were to descend upon us, they'd probably help them. And we would be defeated by some of our people living in the land here, in that land of Goshen. So they became fearful. And so we got to stop them from multiplying so much. So what did they do? Yeah, that's the eventually. But first, they said let's have the midwives destroy the report or destroy, however they did, destroy the baby boys. That'll slow down these folks from multiplying so much. Well, the Israelites, they just quit having midwives, and they're multiplying right along. Had their own babies, and they didn't call the midwife. And so that didn't work. Then they put out an order, the Egyptians did, that all baby boys should be killed. And evidently they had some sort of an inspection system, because when Moses was born, he was born to the tribe of what? Levi. The Levitical tribe, the priestly tribe. Levi was one of the sons. Levi became, and his descendants became the priestly tribe. All priests under this Mosaic dispensation were to come from the priestly tribe, from Levi, tribe of Levi. All right, that's important to remember that. And you ask why Christ did not come from the tribe of Levi. He came from the tribe of Judah. He was a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. That didn't fit this system. All right. This man Moses was born. He had that family already had an older brother and an older sister. What was their names? Aaron and Miriam. See, Aaron then, of course, became more or less the daddy of all the priests. And these two